Hi, you're watching Mindshifting Moments, a show created to help destigmatize the psychedelic industry through transparent conversation and getting answers to your big questions from those experts who works hands-on in the industry every day. I'm your host, Margaret Williamson, head of partnerships at Nucleus Holdings, a venture studio that's creating brands that educate the masses, aggregate data, and activate customers inside of the psychedelic industry. And in that capacity, I spend most of my time talking about the benefits of psychedelic medicine. Unfortunately, decriminalization is spreading across the United States, and more people who need access to this medicine are going to get it, and some of them from the comfort of their own homes. But that begs the question, are there concerns around self administering psychedelics? So, to help me answer that question, we have a wonderful guest today. Please help me welcome Warren Gumpel to the Mind Shifting Moment stage. Hello,
Hi,
Warren.
Margaret. Hi, Margaret. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for coming. I really was excited to have you as our expert to help us answer this question for a myriad of reasons. But let's start with maybe just giving the listeners a little bit of a background on you. How would you sort of describe yourself and your role inside of psychedelics today?
Yeah, well, I come to psychedelics from somebody that was looking for answers, having suffered from depression myself, staggered throughout my life, kind of this roller coaster of dealing with depression, being on medications, going and speaking to the experts, and, eventually falling back into these deep holes of depression. And then very luckily, I was living in New York City about 6, 7 years ago, and not from any of the expert psychopharmacologists that I was seeing in Manhattan and paying, however much you pay to go see those kind of people, had I heard about ketamine or psychedelics. But luckily, in my own research, I found ketamine. One of the real pioneers in this country, Dr. Glenn Brooks, was administering ketamine, a 7-minute walk from my apartment in Lower Manhattan. And I found it in that way. And it worked so fast and so well after so many attempts at other things that it became instantly my passion, and instantly the purpose of my life was to at least be an advocate for letting people know that it exists. Because, the suffering of depression, it's just so painful. It's so ubiquitous in this country, and the solutions are minimal, rarely effective, not rarely effective, but, not effective enough. And people need to know there are other solutions. So that was my entree into the business and into the industry and into this, this whole other world. And then from there, I kind of just grabbed the microphone and started screaming to people and telling them my story and being very honest about my depression, which, was kind of hard to face and kind of hard to present to the public, but I felt like it was important for me to do it. And then I just have been helping chaperone people into it. And that was how I started.
So amazing. And you hit on so many things, and hopefully you're willing to dig deep with me a little bit. Because I agree with you, right? That depression is something that I think for many people, we've just sort of chalked it up to like, that's just part of life. The headaches, the anxiety, the heart palpitations, the just feeling uneasiness, the inability to sleep, the just feelings of hopelessness. We just chalk it up to say like, well, life is hard. What do we expect? And the reality is that there's freedom from a lot of those symptoms. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, explaining depression to somebody is impossible. I've tried futilely in the past, but now realized explaining it to someone is impossible. And if you don't know what it is, then you are very, very lucky and blessed. And, nobody should know what it is. But the people that do know what it is understand how painful it is to live with it and through it, and how hard it is to, function, depending on the severity of it, to function in your daily life. A lot of people have depression just enough where they can, put on a face and they can go to work and they can be present, but it's not a joyous life. It's not what anybody would want for their life. So, it's very important to face that it is an issue. It can be a chemical issue, and there are solutions to it.
And so let's talk about some of those solutions. We talk about those traditional modalities of talk therapy and then antidepressants. You're saying you've had experience with both of those courses of treatment.
Yeah.
What would you say, after going through talk therapy, what differences did you feel like that made? And then maybe let's run through, okay, on antidepressants, and then we'll talk about when you finally had a ketamine experience, what those differences were.
Sure. I mean, talk therapy for me, it works for a lot of people. I've been involved with thousands of people and helping them with their depression, either through the 501c3 that I've helped create, or just being part of this industry. And talk therapy works certainly for a lot of people very close to me in my life. For me, it didn't move the needle very much. So, that's usually where people start. Then, if you move on into classic SSRIs like Lexapro and Prozac, which have been the standard first line of treatment, pharmaceutical treatments for depression, they work for certain number of people. It didn't work for me. Maybe I had respites from depression, but I was one of the people that unfortunately many of the times dealt with the side effects like weight gain and things of that nature that, nobody wants that. And loss of libido, in my early 20s. And, it makes it hard to stick with those treatments. And especially if you're not really feeling any relief from your symptoms of depression. And unfortunately, that's what I experienced with those medications.
Right. And so then you said you did your own research, right? You were saying that I'm not willing to just accept that there is no solution.
Yeah. I mean, that's after years more of graduating from those SSRIs into all of these other medicines that they throw at it, which that's the normal course of treatment in this country. Is if a Lexapro or Prozac isn't working for you, they're going to start stacking other medications on top of it. Some of those medications have harder side effects. So for me, it wasn't, I'm going to try Prozac and it didn't work. I found ketamine. This was a decade of moving around medications, getting periods of relief, which I've luckily had in my life, and then falling back into it. So yeah, I wasn't going to accept that I'd spoken to the experts in the world. This is all they had for me. And there was really no way out except for to keep trying these medicines that, wait 6 weeks to see if it works, if you have these side effects, and, unfortunately discover most of the time that it wasn't working.
Wow. And so then what was the difference? You said that the relief from the ketamine therapy happened almost instantaneously. Is that accurate, or what was different about that?
Yeah. What was different about it, first of all, and I'll just say, that time period, even 6-7 years ago, I had no idea what I was walking into. I'd heard of ketamine, in other senses, but I had no idea. There was no mind-shifting moments. There were no advocates. There wasn't this movement going on. So for me, when I looked at what ketamine was, it said side effects may include dizziness and things like that. And I just walked in there with no idea. So after the first treatment, which was much different than what I expected. I mean, I really went into a different place in my mind that I had ever been. And it was very therapeutic in that sense. After that first one, I started feeling, the ground get solid underneath me. It started. Then after the second one, a little bit more. Then after the third one, that weight that I'd been living under, and it never was gone. Even in those times where I had a little bit of relief, it was never gone. But after that third treatment, that weight lifted and I had a clear view of life and really had my life back. It was one of these moments in my life where I just go back. I know where I was standing when I'm like, oh, I can feel like this and live the rest of my life feeling this way. So that was what it felt like. It was all gone.
Wow. And we want to get more people to that point. I can even say transparently from my standpoint that through people in your network and through KetaMD, I was able to experience some treatment, and it's so much easier to speak about it on this other side. You talked about it being difficult to share stories of depression and just trials from our lives when we're still in it. And I think most of us, right, and until we're willing to step out and accept some of these alternative medicines, that we're always just kind of still stuck in it. So now as ketamine and other psychedelic therapies and treatments are becoming a little bit more accessible, especially through what you guys are doing and saying, hey, we get it, right? Most people that are living in this type of debilitating treatment-resistant depression don't want to go to the doctor's office, right? They don't want to sit through these clinical settings and be administered, medicines. Luckily for you, you said it was 7-minute walk. For some of these people, it's like just the thought of driving into the city and having to park and find all these things would be anxiety producing.
Well, listen, you hit on a huge point. I'm very lucky it was a 7-minute walk. If it was more than that, if it was a cab ride, potentially, I might not have gone, and I don't know what the outcome of that is. And it's scary to think about that. So yeah, I mean, that access, that difficulty of getting out of bed and thinking about going into a doctor's office, these are huge thresholds to cross for somebody with that's in the middle of a major depressive episode. So yeah, it was fateful for me that it was there, and lucky, and it allowed me to get into this position, which I think has allowed me the honor of helping so many people find this treatment. So to me, there's a little bit of magic around it. Like with some of the psychedelics and ketamine, especially for me, there's something that transcends like my understanding of physics and transcends my understanding of the universe. And, this feels a little, it felt like these universal like forces colliding to get me there and then allow me to move on to help other people, which is not something that was the focus of my life before this, but something that I didn't understand how much joy a person could get, being helpful, really just being helpful in that sense.
So amazing. And so we've talked about, the tremendous benefits, right, and the relief that ketamine and other psychedelic treatments can bring. But what about side effects? We talked about the side effects of some of these SSRIs and other antidepressant pharmaceuticals. Are there any side effects that we should be concerned about?
I think with ketamine, with ketamine specifically, it's it's been used as an anesthetic in much higher doses for over 50 years. We have quite a lot of data about the safety and efficacy of ketamine as an anesthetic. So most importantly, and what should be most important for anyone, is safety, and ketamine is very safe. If a child in the United States were to go in for oral surgery right now at a hospital where you are, they'd be given ketamine as their anesthetic because it doesn't suppress your respiratory system like other anesthetics. So side effects wise, mostly nuisance side effects like nausea. There are certain indications in certain people with health conditions that are not candidates for ketamine. And the most that we most often discuss is untreated high blood pressure and glaucoma. But otherwise, most people are safe to use ketamine. There are not a lot of contraindications with other medicines. Of course, something to certainly check with your doctor, and something that at KetaMD we would certainly clear. But truth is, no dangerous contraindications that I could talk about here. And for the most part, it's pretty benign.
Great. So, you mentioned that it's being used widespread as an anesthetic already. And I think a lot of us have heard it from that. And I've heard, it's kind of in my inner circle when I talk about ketamine, like the horse tranquilizer, is it? And so talk about that dosage, like, hey, let's put that into perspective for us a little bit more.
Yeah, the anesthetic dose is just much higher than the dose you would receive in for mental health purposes. I don't know what the numbers are of the anesthetic dose, but you're anesthetized. You're no longer plugged in. So what we're looking to achieve is this sub-anesthetic dose where you are dissociated, and that's a unique state of mind. It's an altered state of mind that's very interesting, but much less than you'd be given for much less than you'd be given for anesthesia. And again, ketamine is the world's most widely used anesthetic. It's listed as the 5th most important drug in the world by the World Health Organization. Just to give people that have no lens into what ketamine actually is and how it's been used in the world for the last 50 years. It's the 5th most important drug in the world, again, because it's such a safe anesthetic. And it's safe in those anesthetic doses. So you can just,
Are there any other concerns? What we're talking about now is amazing, right? The ability for people to get truly, I feel like, life-saving treatment in the comfort of their own home.
Yeah.
How is that something? Are they just by themselves? Is it like, hey, you're going to get a package in the mail and good luck? You know what I mean? Can you overdose? You know what I mean? These are the types of concerns that I think,
Yeah, absolutely. And people should. The way that we do it is 100% safety first. Our protocols were written by the world's experts on ketamine for the use in mood disorders, Dr. Roger McIntyre and his research team at Braxia Scientific. So the protocols, the intake, the kind of patients that KetaMD and the clients that KetaMD will treat are specific. They have to meet criteria. They have to speak to a prescriber, a provider, and be deemed safe to do it. And then the medication is shipped to the person's house where they'll sign for it. And when they do a treatment, it's required that they have a support buddy in their physical location, but every one of their treatments is supervised by a KetaMD trained nurse. So a nurse will be available over a HIPAA compliant Zoom. They'll make sure that the set and setting is proper, and they have the steps to allow people to breathe into their treatment, curated music that fits very well with the treatment, and then other safety protocols that they go down and they check through the list and make sure that the person's in the right space to receive the treatment. So it's very monitored in the way that the world is moving. It's remotely monitored. We have to do it to increase access. Again, people just don't have access to ketamine in most places where they live. So now we're bringing it to your living room, and we're making it as safe as possible by screening the right clients and making sure that they're supervised both physically by a person in their home and a trained nurse.
Wow. I mean, it's so exciting, the future and where this is going. Now, is this something that is for all ages, or is there a threshold? I mean, is this maybe considered sort of like alcohol? It's 21 and over, it's 18 and over. What are some of the thoughts around that?
I mean, in my experiences with ketamine in general, not KetaMD, but I've seen people treated by doctors that really know what they're doing, younger ages. But at KetaMD, it's 18 and over. Just because we're dealing with adults that are making their own decisions. Not that there's not use cases for people under 18. It's just not something that we're ready to do at home necessarily at this point. Again, we feel like we're the shepherds of this treatment into this modern era, and for that reason, like, I take it very seriously, because mistakes in this area can cost a lot of people their future mental health. So we are approaching this from a safety first standpoint. So yeah, there are people under 18 that could receive it and would be candidates for ketamine, but not through KetaMD, through the at-home treatment.
Wonderful. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So I know you guys are active already in the Miami area. As decriminalization is spreading, do you guys immediately tend to follow those bills, or what's the plan to bring this type of therapy to more people?
Yeah, well, ketamine is a legal Schedule III, FDA approved drug. So the decriminalization of some of the other psychedelics is just a separate avenue from ketamine. But we just plan to spread across the United States to where people need it, all over this country, hopefully across the world. I mean, there's a desperate need for psychiatric care and things that work, and this new modality. So, the mission of KetaMD is to treat all of those people that need it, and to do it in a safe, effective way. So, we plan to spread throughout the country. We're in Florida right now with plans for a rapid expansion over the next, certainly over the next 6 months, to start expanding to the bigger states, and then to continue branching out over the next year.
Wonderful. And would potential patients, would they access your treatment through their traditional therapists, like mental health doctors, or can they go directly to the source?
Yeah, they would go right to KetaMD. All of the prescribers, the doctors and nurse practitioners, have been trained under our medical staff, a Harvard-trained anesthesiologist, plus Dr. McIntyre, Dr. Joshua Rosenblatt, two of the world's experts on ketamine. So the prescribers at KetaMD will evaluate the person to see if they're a proper candidate, and they would go right through the website via a telehealth visit. And again, it's the Amazon way of approaching mental health, as opposed to, that brick and mortar clinic, which there's certainly a need for. There's certain people that should go in and should do it in that space. But in order to treat the 50 million or so Americans that could benefit from ketamine, going into brick and mortar clinics is not necessary. And that's not my opinion. That's deemed by the world's experts, is that it can be done safely and effectively in this way and not plausible. And that's the real issue, that access, that plausibility of them receiving care.
I agree. So when they want to go through that, what's like a traditional course of treatment? You know, how many sessions? You mentioned you kind of really feeling that relief on your third treatment. You know, how deep or how long are people signing up for when they begin this course?
So what has been talked about throughout all of the time that I've spent in the ketamine world is the Yale protocol, which is 6 treatments over the course of 2 weeks to a month, and that's the same protocol that I experienced when I first found ketamine. And then what you can expect is you'll need boosters. You know, sometimes usually the interval is somewhere between 3 weeks and 3 months, and you'll get a booster, a single booster, sometimes a double booster, depending on the person's need. And you can expect that interval to repeat itself for a year or so, and then potentially start extending out to where you need them less often. And that's a general course of treatment for people. Now, everyone's individual, and how they react and the duration of relief from symptoms is different for everybody. But for the most part, those are reasonable protocols and reasonable frequencies that in all of my time we can rely on.
Now, I want to make sure that, you know, we are kind of getting this question answered. Are there any other kind of concerns, things that concern you as more and more people would begin self-administering? Or do you even deem this self-administration when it is?
No. There's a lot of concerns around self-administration of anything. I mean, you know, if we move over to the broader psychedelic realm, which I'm very interested, I know it's, for me personally, I know it's the future of mental health care, and I know it's the future of a broader range of other health issues. But self-administration is scary in that, you know, we always talk about set and setting, but we have to talk about understanding what you have, you know, moving on from ketamine into some of these other psychedelics like mushrooms, you know, psilocybin mushrooms, ibogaine, which I think is very important, and also, you know, a very heavy medicine. I wouldn't recommend that anyone self-administer that. So what we do, I certainly don't consider it self-administration. You know, it's overseen by a physician, prescriber, and monitored constantly by nurses. So it's a different thing. But in this wide universe of expanding psychedelics and decriminalization, I think self-administration should be very carefully approached. There's a lot of research out there, so people can research and understand. They should speak to an expert before doing anything, because most of these medicines are safe and benign for most people. But some people coming in with previous psychiatric histories, it can have a traumatic, the treatment itself can leave a traumatic effect, or it can send somebody into psychosis potentially. So understanding who you are, speaking with a professional that understands, you know, the contraindications of some of these medicines is crucial for our world of psychedelics, because, you know, as we all in this industry, we want to guard this very carefully. A couple of bad incidents can hamper all of the progress that we've made. So I beg people to take all of those precautions and setting, speaking to an expert, making sure they understand what they're getting into. I mean, it's crucial for us to maintain the integrity and the trajectory of this industry, of things becoming open and becoming more accessible.
And what, you know, about that, and they called it, and I talked to, you know, some colleagues and friends, and saying like free form use, right? And so as people can get their hands on some of these psychedelic medicines, there is that temptation to, right, just try it on your own.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say is like, hey, let's be cautious about that. And are there resources that if someone were to obtain some of these medicines that they could turn to say, like, I got my hands on this, I want to experience this treatment, who can help me? You know, I mean,
well, you're building this resource right now. I mean, we're talking about it. There's so many outlets to find out so much information. Now, you know, it's ubiquitous on the internet. I mean, you can Google any of these things and find all of these wonderful resources by people in the medical world, by people in the, you know, that have been whose family and ancestry have been taking some of these medicines for, thousands of years. For something like the synthesis of LSD, you can go back and read quite a bit of research. So there's a lot available. But back to your original point, yes, certainly resist the temptation of just getting your hands on something and thinking it's a good idea to ingest, because, even if it's safe, and even if it's an okay outcome, you're not going to get the most out of it. There's certain ways to use these things. They're sacred in some ways, and you want to treat them with that kind of respect, and using them without that kind of intent and without paying attention to the reasons why you're using it and what it is just, it's not good for the person. Again, they might not have a bad outcome, but they certainly aren't maximizing the potential good in the outcome. And I really think that's what this is all about, is, getting the most out of the least. You don't want to, rely on doing a large amounts of anything for the rest of your life. So you want to do the minimum amount you can have for the maximum efficacy.
I love that you just said that, because I think, in my mind, that's one of the biggest benefits of psychedelic treatments, is that unlike some of these pharmaceuticals that immediately just cause addiction, and the prognosis is, you're just going to have to keep taking these forever to experience the relief. That's not the case with compounds like that.
No, it's not. You expect to start building new neural pathways in your brain. You're actually helping to build the architecture of your brain. What term that's talked about often is neuroplasticity. Parts of your brain that weren't speaking before are starting to connect, and really, this is changing those thought patterns that you've had, that you fall back on all the time, that sometimes is depression and sometimes is anxiety. There are new paths to charter. There are new ways of thinking, and that's what something like ketamine does. It starts building those neural pathways, gives you new ways of thinking, opens up your option set in the world. And that's for somebody that saw the world very black and white, binary, like I did. Seeing these options start coming together is really exciting, and it's life affirming.
And it's not something that then you'll be chasing that high or chasing that feeling, right? Those effects just continue to happen after you've undergone the treatment, right, over the course of the next how many hours?
Yeah, the ketamine is not about it. The ketamine, as much as you get all of these beautiful insights, sometimes for some people when they've taken the ketamine, the effects of the ketamine are what's happening after. The ketamine metabolizes quickly out of your system. Those building of new neural pathways, that's the real structural change that's happening in your brain. And that's why you're not taking ketamine every day like you would take an SSRI, and it's constantly changing your neurochemistry. You're taking it, it's getting through your system, and you're feeling the relief and the effects for a lot of time after that. It's not while it's in your system.
So now, why, or have you experienced any pushback or friction from your traditional kind of talk therapy doctors or therapists? Are they accepting? Are they ready to combine this with their treatment protocols, or what's kind of happening on that side?
Some people are dug in. There's certainly some people in the world that this doesn't fit into their business model, is actually curing people. It's sad to say, but it's true. There's definitely been some pushback. I have a lot of strength in the way that I'm approaching this, and the way that I'm doing that is that, when we started this, the co-founders that you mentioned, Zappy and Kaya and Leanne Taylor, when we started this, we wanted to reach out to the world's experts. So our chief medical officer, Dr. Dan Kang, put me in touch with Dr. Roger McIntyre. He's unequivocally the world's expert on depression and one of the world's experts on ketamine. He's now the CEO of our parent company, overseeing the protocols. So I feel really good about it. So sometimes if I speak to a psychiatrist, a local psychiatrist or a local psychotherapist, and they have negative things to say about it, I feel quite a bit of strength being able to fall back and say, well, I work now with the world's expert on depression and psychiatry, the most published researcher in the world on this, and he's saying this is the way that we need to tackle this from a public health angle. And I trust him much more than I trust myself. He has decades of experience. hundreds, if not thousands of studies related to depression. And this is how he's saying we need to start tackling depression in this country and internationally.
And I know you guys have been involved, media is a big part of the way that we shape our decision-making process, right, as an American people. And I was just watching a show the other night on Apple TV, and it's just this drama, and this lady was talking about, trying to get over some of this traumatic brain injury and memory loss. And she goes to this, holistic medicine doctor, and the way they frame it, it's all white and very clinical. And he's saying they have a proprietary cocktail of psilocybin and ketamine, and her traditional talk therapist is saying absolutely not. I do not recommend it. Like, it can put you in a state of psychosis. And those are the things. And then she goes through the process, ends up like self-administering, sees horses, and paintings are coming to life for her. She's at a party, and how far off is that from a genuine experience, or is that what some people could expect when they're going through the treatment?
In terms of like what you may see, like visually, and some of the things you may encounter. I mean, yeah, like if people would see horses,
right? You know what I mean? If it's I'm in this, I don't know what's real and what's not, or how would you explain your experience?
I mean, I've had mystical experiences where I've seen things much more evolved than horses. So certainly I've probably seen horses, but I've had feelings like I have had a religious experience where I've kind of like got some answers as to like what the universe is about. So I could certainly see people having this. It's not uncommon. I've sat with so many people throughout their treatment. I've been an advocate, helped treat the veterans at, Zappy and my founding of the Ketamine Fund, where we've donated hundreds of treatments to veterans, sat through those veterans who have, sat through all of these people and all of their experiences, and some of the experiences and some of the visuals that people might see are strange. But what I would say separates kind of ketamine from psilocybin for me personally is I have a proclivity towards anxiety. And the first thing that I feel when I take ketamine is a full relief of anxiety. So, at the times that I've taken psilocybin, and some of them have been great and some of them have been anxiety ridden, is that, I kind of perk up and, maybe release some of the stress chemicals, and that could color my experience with the ketamine. I'm able to have those kind of experiences where I'm seeing things that are unique and unusual, but from a place of zero anxiety. And that's one of the amazing things about ketamine, and one of the reasons why I think it's the best, for people that need it for certain conditions, why it's the best way to start with some of these medications, because it doesn't last very long. It's not anxiety provoking for most people, and you might get some visions that are very different than you would in your normal life.
But again, right, you're not doing it alone. You're in the right set and setting, and I think that's I drill it home as often as I can, because that for me was a big mind shift, like taking this out of this like perception as a party drug, taking it out of the context that you're supposed to be ingesting some of these medicines like at night at a party when you're dehydrated with alcohol, all these things, and taking it back to understanding it's a medicine. And even when you're able to do it in the comfort of your own home environment, that it's still something that you're creating the proper intentions, you're setting your intentions, and then you're being mindful of who you have around you, like you said, the playlist, what you're listening to, and in that safe environment. So thank you for making those distinctions.
Crucial, again, from my angle, and I'm like, because there's so many angles to approach this whole psychedelic world from, I picked my lane, right? It's depression, it's addiction, it's some of these things that are what I see as the biggest problems, some of the biggest problems in society, and ones that I understand very well. So, for me, the people that I like to speak to, that I'm looking to help with ketamine, certainly are people that are coming in with depression or coming in with a related mental health disorder. And that's kind of like, you're going in for that. You're going in for that purpose. You know why you're there. It's for that specific reason. And then in terms of like some of the other people that are doing it for, expanding their consciousness, I'm all for that. It's not my exact angle right now. I really want to help people that were suffering exactly in the way that I did, with something that I know works, that I know is safe, that I know our protocols have been written by the world's experts.
Well, thank you so much, Warren. I think we definitely shifted some minds throughout this conversation, and hopefully, assuage some fears, address some concerns. And if there are people that are listening that are feeling, felt a connection, felt something stirring as you were speaking, what's the best next step for them to take?
Yeah, if you're interested in at home, and it sounds like from how I've described it that you could be a candidate, is to go to KetaMD and first and foremost educate yourself, learn about it, read the studies. Some of that understanding and some of that confidence you get in seeing just how effective it is for how many people gives you the courage to move forward. But go visit KetaMD, educate yourself. If it feels right for you, proceed on to treatment. And I'll always be there. I still spend a lot of time as an advocate, easy to reach out to, happy. And it's probably one of the most fulfilling things I do in my whole life is, remain personally interested in people who reach out to me in their particular situation. So I'm available in that sense as well.
Well, thank you again for sharing your time and your experience with us today. And we look forward to the continued destigmatization of the psychedelic industry, and just the acceptance of different modalities, different paths of treatment, and that we can maybe, hopefully lose some of the judgment and accept more of the healing. So until next week, we will see you guys again. Let me know if you've got any big questions about psychedelics, and I can put in touch, get answers from the right experts like Warren. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time.